In the quiet corners of our societies, a silent force is at work. It's not a villain that we can easily recognize, nor a monster waiting to pounce. No, it's something far subtler, more dangerous. Something that shapes the course of history, yet goes unnoticed by most. This force is not the raw evil of a tyrant or a dictator. It is the pervasive, creeping force of stupidity. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian and resistance fighter, saw this danger clearer than most. He didn't view stupidity as a mere intellectual failure or an occasional lapse in judgment. For him, stupidity was far more destructive. It was not just a personal flaw, but a profound and insidious force in society. It was a force so dangerous that Bonhoeffer believed it was more harmful than evil itself. Stupidity, as Bonhoeffer argued, is not something that can be simply reasoned with. It isn't the kind of flaw that can be corrected through education or dialogue. Evil, for all its malice, can be confronted through reason, but stupidity is impervious to intellectual engagement. It actively resists awareness, rejects reflection, and shuns the possibility of change. Where ignorance may be solved through the accumulation of knowledge, stupidity thrives in a deep-seated refusal to think critically. Imagine living in a society where questioning the status quo or seeking new truths becomes a rare, rebellious act. Bonhoeffer believed this refusal to engage with new ideas or perspectives was more than an intellectual oversight. It was a rejection of intellectual growth itself. People who are trapped by stupidity do not simply lack knowledge, they actively turn away from it. They cling to their beliefs without ever examining them, even when those beliefs are clearly flawed or harmful. This is where Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity grows increasingly unsettling. He saw that this mindset is not just a personal issue, it's a social one. Stupidity, he argued, spreads through communities like a disease. It erodes the capacity for critical thinking in the collective, making it harder for people to recognize injustice or to challenge destructive power. In this context, stupidity isn't just a passive absence of thought, it's a rejection of thinking itself. Now imagine you're living in a society where moral reflection is discarded. In Bonhoeffer's time, he witnessed how the refusal to think critically allowed the Nazi regime to thrive. The regime didn't rise simply through evil, it was built on the ignorance and passivity of ordinary people, people who refused to challenge authority or question the narrative of the regime. This intellectual laziness, this compliance, was just as dangerous as the evil itself. It allowed atrocities to unfold without resistance. If you think about it, you might wonder, could such a thing happen again? Could society, even today, fall into the same traps of ignorance and passivity? The problem isn't just the evil we can see, but the intellectual laziness that enables it to persist. It's in the silence of those who know better but choose to do nothing, in the hearts of those who blindly follow authority because it's easier than questioning it. And that is why stupidity, far more than ignorance or malice, is so dangerous. But here's the real question: how can we guard against this? How can we resist the pull of ignorance, of thoughtless compliance? The first step is acknowledging the danger stupidity poses and recognizing that it's not something that will simply go away. So, let me ask you, in your daily life, are you questioning the things that are told to you? Are you challenging your own assumptions? Are you engaging with the world critically, or are you allowing the simplicity of others' beliefs to fill in the gaps? If you haven't been doing so already, it's time to start. The fight against stupidity is an ongoing one, but it starts with small personal choices. By asking questions, by challenging what we know, and by continually seeking truth, no matter how uncomfortable, it is possible to break free from the cycle of ignorance. Stay with us as we move into Chapter 2, where we delve into the role stupidity plays in positions of power and how leaders can become more dangerous when they stop questioning their own actions. Are you ready to break free from the grip of unexamined beliefs? If this resonates with you, take the first step today by subscribing and engaging with these important ideas. Let's explore how to challenge the forces that perpetuate stupidity and cultivate a more thoughtful, reflective society. Imagine a leader who never questions their own decisions, a person who is surrounded by advisors who all think the same way, reinforcing the status quo, never challenging the narrative. Now imagine this leader holds the power to shape the lives of millions. This, in essence, is where stupidity becomes a tool of tyranny. It's not always the overt malice of the powerful that drives destruction. Sometimes, it's their unwillingness to think critically about their own actions, their failure to ask the difficult questions. Bonhoeffer observed this chilling phenomenon during his time in Nazi Germany. Those in positions of power, especially those who surrounded themselves with like-minded individuals, became increasingly immune to critical thought. They didn't have to engage with complexity because the structures of power rewarded conformity. It created an environment where authority went unquestioned, and decisions were made not through rational deliberation, but through blind obedience to established norms. This creates a deadly loop, a feedback cycle where stupidity perpetuates itself. Leaders, more concerned with maintaining their power than with making rational decisions, surround themselves with yes men. These sycophants do not challenge them. They confirm their biases, bolstering their worldview with uncritical support. The result? A collective blindness to reality, where decisions are made based on convenience, loyalty, and conformity rather than reason and evidence. This kind of leadership is not necessarily malicious. It's dangerous because it's detached from reality. And when leaders refuse to question themselves or their actions, they open the door to real harm. This phenomenon doesn't just exist in authoritarian regimes or totalitarian systems. It manifests wherever power structures reward conformity and punish dissent. Think about your own life. How often are dissenting voices ignored or even silenced in the workplace, in politics, or in social circles? When everyone in power is speaking the same language, questioning anything can seem like an act of rebellion. Yet it's this very questioning that is the lifeblood of critical thought. Without it, stupidity thrives. The real danger is that this dynamic feeds on itself. Stupidity, in this context, becomes a self-reinforcing system. Leaders become less inclined to question their own decisions, becoming more resistant to alternative viewpoints, and more prone to unquestioning obedience to authority. The result is decisions made not with care or understanding, but with blind faith in the system. This cycle of stupidity isn't just theoretical, it's the reality in many aspects of society today. We see it in politics, in business, in cultural norms. Leaders often surround themselves with advisors who mirror their own views, reinforcing a dangerous echo chamber. And when everyone is thinking the same way, new ideas are rarely entertained. In such environments, creativity dies, progress is stunted, and the potential for disaster becomes all too real. Reflect for a moment. How often do we let passivity reign in our lives? How many times do we turn a blind eye to things because we fear questioning authority? The leaders of the past didn't create atrocities because they were all evil. They were enabled by a public that refused to think critically, a public that accepted the narrative handed to them without challenge. But there's hope. There's always hope, and it starts with each of us. The challenge is not just to recognize this dynamic, but to actively resist it in our own lives, to ask questions where others don't, to challenge assumptions, and to demand critical thought in every sphere of influence. Now, I know you might be wondering, How can we resist this in our own world today? How do we ensure that we don't fall into the same traps of conformity and intellectual passivity? The first step is simple. Question everything. Don't take things at face value. If a leader or a group asks you to follow, ask why. If a system seems unreasonably unquestioned, take a step back and ask if it's truly right. By fostering an environment where intellectual challenges are encouraged, we break the cycle of stupidity and foster progress. So, what can you do right now? It's time to start pushing back against the systems that favor passivity, whether it's in your workplace, in your community, or in your personal life. Engage in conversations that make people uncomfortable. Ask the tough questions. Push for the intellectual space where different viewpoints can thrive. This is how we can begin to dismantle the structures that allow stupidity to flourish. Stay with us as we move into Chapter 3, where we explore the consequences of intellectual passivity in societies and how the rejection of critical thinking allows dangerous ideologies to spread unchecked. Take action now. Subscribe, share, and be a part of the growing movement that values critical thought and intellectual engagement. Challenge the status quo and empower yourself to make a difference today. Let's begin the change together. You've seen it before, how quickly misinformation spreads. A seemingly harmless rumor becomes a widespread belief, often gaining traction not because it's true, but because it's repeated over and over. The speed at which ideas, especially irrational ones, can spread through society is staggering. But here's the unsettling part. It's not just about how fast an idea spreads, it's about how easily society is manipulated into believing it. And this is where the social contagion of stupidity comes into play. Stupidity, when institutionalized or spread through social structures, becomes far more dangerous than a mere individual flaw. It becomes a collective mindset. Ideas that lack substance or are rooted in falsehoods don't just fade away, they grow stronger with each repetition, each unchallenged narrative. This is a societal phenomenon, a contagion that doesn't spread through viruses, but through minds that stop thinking critically. We see this happening on a massive scale in today's world, especially in the age of social media. The digital age has created an environment where information is shared faster than ever, but often it's not the truth that travels the quickest. It's the simplified, sensationalized stories, the quick fixes, and the clickbait narratives that gain the most attention. And because information is consumed in a constant stream, often without scrutiny or analysis, people begin to accept what they hear without questioning it. This, however, isn't just a flaw of the individual, it's a reflection of a larger, systemic issue. In a world where people increasingly seek out information that aligns with their pre-existing beliefs, critical thinking takes a backseat to convenience. The rise of echo chambers and filter bubbles on social media has only exacerbated this problem. We are now surrounded by content that caters to our biases, reinforcing them rather than challenging them. Here's the troubling truth. When a society begins to embrace unexamined beliefs, it's not just an intellectual failing, it's a moral one. It's a refusal to question, a rejection of responsibility. It's the groupthink mentality that stops individuals from thinking for themselves. And when people stop thinking for themselves, they become susceptible to dangerous ideologies. Think about it. How many times have you seen something on social media and immediately accepted it as truth just because it was shared by enough people or presented in a way that was emotionally charged? It's easier to believe something when it aligns with what we already think, or when it's repeated often enough that we begin to accept it as fact. The result? A society that is increasingly divided, unable to engage in meaningful discourse, and primed for manipulation. But it doesn't have to be this way. The antidote to the social contagion of stupidity is simple, yet profound: critical thinking. The more we teach ourselves and others to think critically, the less vulnerable we become to the mindless repetition of falsehoods. By asking questions, examining the sources of our information, and challenging our own assumptions, we create a buffer against the forces of intellectual passivity. This is where we come to a key turning point. The spread of stupidity isn't inevitable. We don't have to passively accept it. We have the power to create a culture of intellectual engagement, a culture where questioning and critical analysis are celebrated, not feared. This starts with each of us. It's about resisting the social pressure to conform, resisting the temptation to accept simplistic narratives, and instead, embracing complexity and nuance. But to truly break free from the contagion of stupidity, we must first recognize its mechanisms. How does it spread? Who benefits from this cycle of ignorance? And perhaps, most importantly, how can we stop it? It begins with you, today. The next time you're exposed to an idea or claim, pause and ask, where did this information come from? Is it based on evidence? Is it oversimplified? Are there other perspectives I should consider? Don't be afraid to step outside of the narrative you're being told. Seek out diverse viewpoints, dig deeper, and, above all, stay curious. Challenge yourself. Don't just accept things because they're easy to understand or because they confirm your beliefs. Push the boundaries of your understanding and encourage others to do the same. Every time we engage critically with information, we push back against the dangerous spread of ignorance. As we move into Chapter 4, we will explore how we can combat the intellectual laziness that underpins the social contagion of stupidity, and how we can create environments that nurture critical thinking and intellectual courage. If you're ready to take the next step in rejecting mindless conformity, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can fight the spread of stupidity and build a society that values thoughtful, independent thinking. Imagine a world where every decision, every belief, every ideology is accepted without question. A world where curiosity is abandoned in favor of conformity, and intellectual growth is stunted by the fear of discomfort. This is the kind of society that allows tyranny to thrive, not necessarily through violence, but through apathy, through a refusal to think critically, and through an intellectual laziness that spreads like wildfire. In this world, ideas go unquestioned, decisions are made without consideration of their consequences, and power is abused because the people who hold it are not held accountable. This is the terrifying truth. Intellectual laziness is the fuel that drives the engines of oppression. When we fail to question the information we're fed, when we avoid engaging with complexity, when we turn a blind eye to the uncomfortable truths that challenge our beliefs, we open the door for tyranny to flourish. Think about the regimes throughout history that have relied on this intellectual passivity, where the populace was too complacent, too intellectually lazy, to challenge the narratives being pushed by those in power. These regimes didn't need to force compliance through brute force alone. They didn't need to silence every voice of dissent through violence. They simply needed to create an environment where people stopped asking questions, where critical thought was discouraged, and where conformity was rewarded. The result? The masses followed the narrative, regardless of its truth or morality. Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell all understood that when intellectual laziness becomes the norm, tyranny finds fertile ground. Tyranny doesn't just rely on the strength of its leaders, it depends on the passivity of the people. When citizens stop engaging with ideas, when they cease to think critically, they become easy prey for manipulation and control. But it's not just totalitarian regimes where this plays out. It happens every day in smaller, more insidious ways. Think about the political systems we engage with, the media we consume, and the institutions we trust. How often do we simply accept the narratives presented to us without question? How often do we ignore the complexities of the issues at hand because it's easier to accept the simplistic solutions or the slogans being sold to us? Intellectual laziness isn't just about being uninformed, it's about being unwilling to be informed. It's about choosing comfort over challenge, simplicity over complexity. And when intellectual laziness becomes the status quo, we stop thinking for ourselves and we stop holding our leaders and institutions accountable. This is how oppressive systems persist, not through overt violence, but through the quiet, insidious spread of intellectual passivity. So, how do we combat this? How do we overcome the temptation to accept easy answers and embrace the discomfort of critical thought? The answer, as always, lies within us. We must cultivate the courage to question, to seek out new perspectives, and to be uncomfortable with simplicity. We must create spaces where challenging ideas are welcomed, where complexity is not feared, and where the uncomfortable truth is valued over the comforting lie. We can begin by making intellectual engagement a part of our daily lives. It doesn't have to be a monumental task. It can start with simple actions. Ask questions. Read widely. Listen to those who challenge your beliefs. When you hear a statement that sounds too good to be true, don't just accept it. Ask why it's true, what evidence backs it up, and what other perspectives exist. Intellectual growth comes from embracing discomfort, from engaging with ideas that make us question everything we thought we knew. And as we do this, we must also encourage others to join us in this journey of critical thinking. Intellectual laziness is a collective phenomenon, and it can only be overcome when we all take responsibility for thinking critically. Create environments where questioning is encouraged. Have conversations that challenge your beliefs. Surround yourself with people who will push you to think deeper and more critically about the world. It's time to stop being passive consumers of information. It's time to become active participants in our intellectual lives. In the next chapter, we will explore the practical steps we can take to resist the tide of intellectual laziness and build a society that values critical thought, intellectual courage, and moral responsibility. Are you ready to take the next step in this journey of intellectual awakening? Click that subscribe button, share this message with others, and let's work together to create a world where critical thinking and intellectual engagement are at the heart of everything we do. Let's build a society that resists the forces of stupidity and embraces the power of thought. In a world where conformity often trumps originality, where unquestioning loyalty is celebrated over independent thought, the true mark of intellectual courage lies in the willingness to question authority. This is where the battle for truth begins, not with grand gestures or revolution, but with the quiet yet powerful act of asking, why? Especially when it feels uncomfortable, inconvenient, or even dangerous. Throughout history, many of the most significant shifts in societal norms and systems have come not from the powerful, but from those who dared to stand up and question the prevailing narratives. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's resistance to Nazi Germany is a prime example. He was not some outlier. He was someone who recognized that the intellectual laziness of the masses, what he saw as passive acceptance of Nazi ideology, would lead to the downfall of morality, freedom, and truth itself. He stood against it even at great personal cost, because he understood that questioning authority is not just an act of rebellion, it's an act of responsibility. But asking questions is not always easy. It requires courage, humility, and, above all, a willingness to be uncomfortable. In a world where most of us are conditioned to follow authority, to trust the leaders, and to accept the world as it's presented to us, it takes immense bravery to break free from the herd and ask the hard questions. It takes courage to step into unknown territory, especially when doing so might challenge your career, your relationships, or your standing in society. However, this is where we must ask, how else can we move forward? How else can we create change in the world if we don't challenge the status quo? How can we progress if we don't look at things with a critical eye, recognizing the ways in which our institutions and ideologies have been shaped by historical baggage, biased assumptions, and intellectual complacency? The act of questioning authority isn't merely about rebellion or dissent, it's about seeking truth, even when that truth is inconvenient. The danger of intellectual laziness is that it leads to blind obedience. People begin to follow the rules without ever considering why those rules exist or if they should be followed. They accept the narrative handed down to them without ever challenging it. This is where authoritarianism thrives. When people stop questioning, they become complacent, and systems of power can operate unchecked. But here's the truth. When we stop questioning, we stop growing. When we stop questioning, we stop evolving. The world becomes stagnant, and innovation, progress, and justice all come to a grinding halt. The institutions and systems that we trust need to be held accountable. They need to be examined and critiqued. This is the essence of intellectual freedom, the ability to think for oneself, to engage critically with the world, and to demand better from the systems we interact with every day. As we look around us today, we see the effects of intellectual passivity everywhere. From political ideologies that limit the voices of the marginalized to corporate structures that put profits above people, there are countless examples where authority is accepted without question. And where authority goes unchallenged, progress stagnates. We must take the responsibility to question, to look beyond the surface, and to engage with the uncomfortable truths we often shy away from. But how do we cultivate this courage, not just as individuals, but as a society? How do we create an environment where questioning authority isn't seen as subversive, but as a necessary part of intellectual and social progress? The answer lies in education, in fostering a culture of inquiry and skepticism that encourages people to ask difficult questions, challenge existing structures, and engage with new ideas. In schools, in communities, in the workplace, we must create environments where it is not only okay to question, but encouraged. We need to prioritize intellectual independence, where the value isn't in how well we adhere to established norms, but in how well we can think for ourselves and examine the world critically. This doesn't mean rejecting authority for the sake of it, it means questioning it with purpose, seeking to understand its origins, its impact, and whether it truly serves the common good. The true path to progress is built on the foundation of critical engagement with ideas, systems, and power structures. In your own life, take a moment to reflect. When was the last time you asked a question that made you uncomfortable? When was the last time you dared to push against the grain of conventional wisdom and demand more from the systems around you? Start small. Challenge the narratives you hear every day. Ask questions. Look deeper. When you do, you'll be surprised by how much you can uncover and how much your understanding of the world can evolve. As we move into Chapter 6, we will discuss how we can not only question authority, but also lead with intellectual courage, creating a society that values critical thought and moral responsibility, where questioning authority is not seen as a threat, but as the cornerstone of progress. Ready to start asking the tough questions? Subscribe, share, and join the movement of thinkers who challenge the status quo. Together, we can build a world where intellectual courage reigns and truth triumphs over convenience. We've traveled through a challenging journey together, one that has asked tough questions about intellectual laziness, conformity, and the silent forces that allow stupidity to spread unchecked. Now, as we approach the final chapter of this exploration, It's time to focus on what we can do moving forward, how we can apply the lessons we've learned to create a society that values intellectual engagement, critical thinking, and moral courage. The question is simple. How do we break free from the chains of intellectual passivity and foster a world where thoughtful reflection is the norm, not the exception? The answer, I believe, lies in one fundamental truth. It all starts with each of us. The power to create change doesn't lie in grand gestures or in waiting for the perfect moment. It lies in the small, everyday choices we make. It's in the conversations we have, the ideas we challenge, the questions we ask. It's about making a commitment to lifelong learning and to resisting the temptation to accept simplistic answers in an increasingly complex world. The road ahead is not easy, but it is vital. To build a more thoughtful society, we must begin by rethinking our approach to education. True education is not about memorizing facts or blindly accepting what we're told. It's about cultivating the skills of inquiry and curiosity. It's about learning how to think, not just what to think. We need an education system that encourages critical thinking, promotes intellectual humility, and teaches the importance of questioning the world around us. If we want a society that values critical engagement, we need to start with the foundation of our education, where students are taught not just to consume information, but to challenge it, to debate it, and to understand it on a deeper level. This process doesn't end in the classroom. It must extend to every aspect of society, workplaces, communities, political spheres, and even our own homes. Intellectual courage must be a collective effort. When we surround ourselves with people who challenge our thinking, who are not afraid to offer alternative perspectives, we begin to break free from the cycle of ignorance. The next time someone offers an oversimplified solution or a narrative that doesn't hold up under scrutiny, be the one to ask, "Is that really true?" And then be prepared to have the conversation. But this process requires something more. It requires resilience. Intellectual courage is not about being right all the time. It's about being willing to be wrong and to change. It's about embracing the discomfort that comes with self-reflection and accepting that growth often comes with failure. It's about the humility to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers and that seeking the truth is a lifelong pursuit, not a destination. As we move forward, the most important thing we can do is to lead by example. Be the person who questions, who listens, who engages with complexity. Don't let the tide of conformity and intellectual passivity drown out your voice. Seek out diverse viewpoints, challenge your own assumptions, and encourage others to do the same. A thoughtful society starts with thoughtful individuals. By creating spaces where difficult conversations are welcomed, we can begin to dismantle the systems that reward intellectual laziness. In the end, this is the path to a more enlightened future, a world where truth is valued above convenience, where ideas are debated openly and honestly, and where authority is questioned not for the sake of rebellion, but for the sake of understanding and progress. This is a world where intellectual passivity no longer has a place, and where critical thought and moral courage lead the way. So, what's the next step for you? The challenge is clear. Ask the questions, seek the answers, and never stop learning. By doing so, you'll not only break free from the cycle of intellectual laziness, you'll become a force for change in a world that desperately needs it. Join us in this journey. Together, we can create a society that values intellectual courage, a society where critical thinking and moral reflection aren't just ideals, they are the foundation upon which we build our future. If you're ready to take that step, subscribe, share, and stay engaged. Let's continue asking the tough questions, exploring new ideas, and challenging the status quo together.